The Gender Assessment Report by the World Bank has outlined the progress made in relation to gender equality in the country. It analyzes persistent gender gaps and identifies areas of action to narrow disparities. Well, we're joined by the World Bank, we're joined by the DWYPD Acting Deputy Director, General Ranji Reddy. Good evening, General Reddy, and it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Firstly, let's talk about this report. It aims to answer really 4 key questions that will help paint a picture of gender gaps in a country like South Africa and elsewhere in the world where this report is conducted. Speak to us about these questions.
Good evening, Kathy, and good evening to the listeners. Yes, this report has been done in collaboration with the World Bank. It actually looks at the assessment of 3 critical areas of human endowments with a focus on health and education. They look at economic opportunities with a focus on the participation of women in economic activities and in terms of access to and control over key productive assets, particularly access to land. And then it looks at women's voice and agency with a focus on the ability to influence governance, political and decision-making processes. Now, the 4 main questions cuts across all 3 of these dimensions. They look at what are the key gender gaps that are persisting in South Africa. How has these gaps been exacerbated due to the context of COVID-19? And then what are the barriers that constrains the advancement of women and gender equality, and what are the priority areas that need urgent actions so that we can bridge these gender gaps and at least narrow the distance to achieving women's empowerment and gender equality. So they have identified the gaps.
It's quite interesting because when we look at the findings of this assessment, and you know, in a country like South Africa, where we're dealing with such critical challenges that women are facing, gender-based violence not being, you know, not being the least of those challenges, this report, perhaps as an overall study, beginning even at the onset of democracy, paints a different kind of picture, and it's got some silver linings, some good news about the progress that has been made.
Absolutely, Kathy, and it's actually a very interesting reading because it points out in terms of the global context. You know, it uses the reports of the World Economic Forum Global Gap, and it shows, you know, South Africa's positioning and ranking. And it's actually good news. It comes out very strongly in terms of the fact that we have actually moved forward from 1994. We've made serious strides in certain areas. But, you know, it talks about notable progress in terms of women, in representation in parliament. It talks about the achievement of parity between girls and boys at the primary and secondary school and closing the gender gaps in adult literacy. And we actually rank very well in terms of adult literacy across the SADC region. But it also highlights those gaps that are persisting, like poverty among women, the high rates of unemployment, you know, gender-based violence, but definitely the continuation of the marginalization and exclusion from economic empowerment opportunities and the economy in general. So it's very much in keeping with the findings that have been made through other reports in the country. But the good thing about this report, Kathy, is that it goes forward to present the actions that need to be taken across these 3 dimensions I mentioned earlier, so that we can, you know, we need to put in place interventions and programs that will then seek to address and close these gender gaps.
Like so much else in our country, the report also notes that, in addressing these gender gaps, a lot of that has also been shaped by the legacies of the past, including apartheid and how that interacts with race and gender.
Yes, and that was a very important point to make, is that whatever women are experiencing now and the persisting gender gaps, it's like an inherited problem. It's contextualized within the apartheid and colonial past, and it's continuing in terms of bringing forth barriers that are hard to actually address, but they also contextualize it within the challenging social norms that persist in the country. So one of the things that we really need to look at is addressing social norms that continue to impede women's advancement in the country.
Mm. And that is emphasized very clearly in this report, because, again, it's showing South Africa as being one of the least progressive countries, even when it comes to things like work in the household and the nature of who does what, and ultimately says, the kind of work that is expected of women in the household also has a bearing on their ability to either join the labor force market or even stay in the labor force market. I mean, that's literally a barrier for women being able to gain entry to work and to access work.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the unpaid care work and care responsibilities that women face on a daily basis was shown and highlighted very clearly during the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant lockdown, where it showed that women are the first to give up their jobs. They carry the burden of the chores at home, but also for the protection and provision for the family. They looked at the issue of women's poverty levels increasing because the household food hunger levels increased. So definitely we find that it's an area that has not been given enough recognition, and of course it's an unremunerated area for women. So in that respect, Kathy, the department is currently looking at the whole issue of the unpaid care work and the care economy. We're working with UN Women in order to look at, how does this area of work become recognized, and we move towards how do we promote equal sharing of responsibilities and care work between men and women, and to enable women to be able to take on economic opportunities that arise out there. Even something like their leisure time. Women don't have leisure time. They consistently are involved in household chores, care for children, care for the elderly, care for the sick. Yeah.
One of the big things is, that for me was a key takeaway, is that while we have all of these progressive policies, the status of women economically is not changing in this country. It's worsening. And that is something that really needs to be turned around.
Yes. Look, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's worsening. It took a huge negative knockback during COVID-19. If you would recall, Kathy, one of the National Income Dynamic Survey showed that just from April to July 2020, at the start of COVID lockdown, out of the 3 million unemployed people in the country, 2 million were women. So in that sense, it took a knockdown. But if you look at the fact that women are entering very many sectors that were previously dominated by men, then there's progress being made in some areas, but it's perhaps not as fast as we would like to see. You don't really see women being equally represented at management level, particularly in the private sector. And then you don't see them in management levels across all sectors. You'd see them perhaps in retail sectors or sectors that are more, dominated by women. But if you look at construction, manufacturing, mining, etc., you'll see that it's actually a struggle to get women in there. So on one hand, we have made progress. On another hand, there's been a little bit of setback. There's been quite a big setback, particularly for women in informal and small SMEs, etc. But there is still that intention by women to enter different levels of the economy. It's just that economic opportunities need to be made available through the value chains so that women can begin to access these. One of the major issues, Kathy, is a lack of access to land by women. So that also impedes on their ability to actually build factories or to build businesses, because access to land is still remaining a fundamental problem.